The joy of snorkeling in the vibrant underwater world is occasionally tempered by the unforeseen dangers posed by marine life. In some unfortunate instances, individuals seeking aquatic enjoyment have faced attacks by dangerous marine creatures such as sharks, alligators, and crocodiles. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. In today's episode, we go over 3 times people have been fatally mauled while snorkeling. Welcome to Final Affliction. "25-year-old Lauren Failla was living her best life. Originally from New Jersey, USA, she had just finished studying for a master's degree at Sotheby's Institute of Art in London. She was an incredibly talented artist and soprano singer, a kind, warm-hearted individual who had also fallen in love with 24-year-old Hito Chadha. His father was born in India, and Hito was eager to show his girlfriend Lauren the country. On the spur of the moment, they planned a trip to the subcontinent. There were some beautiful places to visit, some exquisite architecture, and incredible beaches. One of those beaches was at Havelock Island, in India's remote Andaman Island chain. Lauren saw the trip as a final adventure before settling down. She had received a distinction in her art masters and intended to shift her focus to social care. She was always described as a caring person, someone who would drop everything to lend a helping hand. She had volunteered with bereaved children by offering art classes as a form of therapy. This was, perhaps, something she intended on doing upon returning to the U.S. after her trip to India. She was an active member of the church and was eager to attend a church concert featuring her favorite group, Morristown's Blair Reinhardt Band, just a few days after returning home. But she would never make the concert. Havelock Island, also known as Swaraj Dweep, is home to some 6,000 people and is situated in the Bay of Bengal. It is known for its stunning beaches. Picture-perfect white sands and turquoise blue waters are lined by a backdrop of lush greenery. The most popular beach, Radhanagar Beach, also called Beach Number 7, is situated on the west coast. It was voted the best beach in Asia by Time magazine in 2004. On April 28, 2010, towards the end of their trip across India, Hito and Lauren headed to Beach Number 7 on Havelock Island. It was just past 3 in the afternoon. The conditions were perfect. Hito was an experienced snorkeler and scuba diver. The two of them headed down to the water's edge, each carrying with them their masks and snorkels. There was no one else about. It was the perfect romantic getaway. They paddled into the water, wading in up to their waists. Then they pulled their masks over their faces and dived into the blue. The shallows opened out to a reef, and the two of them swam along the corals, pointing out the brightly colored fish darting about beneath them. The water was clear. It was warm. Hito was filming the snorkel with his underwater camera. Whilst the beach was deserted, the couple weren't alone. A predator was moving silently closer, though not one you would expect to find out in the open water. It ducked beneath the surface, holding its breath as it swayed its tail from side to side, propelling it through the Indian Ocean. A crocodile's skin, particularly on the head, is covered in pressure sensors known as integumentary sensory organs. These enable the animal to detect surface pressure waves from a long way off. This particular crocodile could sense the presence of Lauren and Hito along the reef. It was on the hunt for a meal. It made a beeline directly for the young couple, drawn to their movements, the vibrations from their splashes and their voices above the water's surface. Lauren and Hito headed towards a cove along the shore. As they swam along, Lauren suddenly felt something sharp grab hold of her leg. It yanked her backwards, and she immediately thought that it was a shark. She cried out in alarm, and she was violently dragged through the water. She instinctively reached down to try and pull her leg free. Hito turned around to see a flash of dark green and gray swirl around Lauren. Bubbles exploded around her as she wrestled with an enormous creature. Hito could see a long, scaly body and a powerful tail thrashing above his head. His eyes were wide as he realized that a 12-foot crocodile had hold of his girlfriend by her leg. He immediately leapt into action. He didn't think about his own safety. He charged towards Lauren and the crocodile and tried to grab it. He instinctively let go of his camera. The video kept rolling as it tumbled to the water column and rested on the seabed, capturing a few seconds of the horrific ordeal. The crocodile had Lauren firmly in its powerful jaws. Hito tried to hit it repeatedly. He tried to wrestle with it, finding its eyes and poking it, but it was too powerful. It was like hitting an armored truck. No amount of force seemed to make the slightest bit of difference. Lauren was fighting for breath. She was desperately trying to make a break for the surface, but the enormous reptile held her under the water, pulling her downwards. It had taken her completely by surprise. She hadn't taken in a deep lungful of air to prepare for the battle. Instead, she felt her lungs burning as she was dragged away from the surface. She was losing the fight. Then the crocodile pulled her away from the reef and out to sea. Hito watched, horrified, as his girlfriend was carried away by the cold-blooded predator. He tried to swim after them, but they had disappeared from sight. Instead, he swam frantically back to the beach to search for help. In the shallows, he screamed for help and half-tripped, half-sprinted out of the water, across the beach into the nearby resort. Emergency services were deployed to the beach, and a search for Lauren ensued, but there was no sign of her. There was no sign of a struggle or of any remains or torn clothing that could verify Hito's version of events. With Lauren missing, the police grew suspicious of Hito and his story. Here was a young man in a secluded spot who was claiming that a crocodile had taken his girlfriend. It was a beach that had never seen crocodiles before. Hito was hauled off to the police station where the officers began to interrogate him. Hito was oblivious to their suspicions. All he could think about was Lauren and her family. It wasn't until the next day that a diver found Hito's camera on the seafloor by the reef. The camera was still working, and it was immediately inspected by police officers. They rewound the footage, and to their absolute horror, they could see that Hito had been telling the truth. As the camera had sunk to the bottom of the sea, it had captured glimpses of an enormous crocodile attacking Lauren. To their surprise, it also depicted Hito as the hero. When they replayed the footage over and over, trying to make sense of the attack, they could see the young man rushing over to Lauren and wrestling with the 12-foot reptile in an attempt to save his girlfriend. That footage was a lifesaver for Hito, but his heart was about to be torn to pieces as 2 days after the incident, authorities found Lauren's remains a short distance from the cove. She had been killed by the crocodile, and her body washed ashore. Both locals and tourists were shocked when the news of Lauren's tragedy spread. The beach was incredibly popular. It was one of the most beautiful beaches on the island and frequented by swimmers and snorkelers. Nobody had ever seen a crocodile there before. Nobody knew that they posed a risk until that moment. It was truly heartbreaking that it had happened to a young woman who was on holiday, having the best time of her life. The nearest crocodile sanctuary was Lohabarak Crocodile Sanctuary, located about 45 sea miles from where Lauren was attacked. There had never been any reports of escaped crocodiles, but in the search for Lauren, authorities came across 4 in the area. The local government were playing with people's lives. There was no signage to indicate that there could potentially be crocodiles in the water near beach number 7. This was something that Lauren's family was furious about. There was no way she would have entered the water if there was even the remotest chance of a crocodile being nearby. Lauren's death hit the family hard, like it would with anyone who lost somebody so young. But for them, it was almost too much to bear. Only 4 years before, in 2006, Lauren's parents, Frank and Kay, lost their eldest daughter, Emily, in a tragic rock climbing accident. She had been 24, 1 year younger than Lauren. Now both girls were gone, and both from tragic accidents, simply from being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Although it was no comfort to Lauren's family, her attack had been incredibly rare. In fact, it was thought that it was the first open-water attack by a crocodile in the Andaman Islands in history. In the past quarter century, there had only been 24 crocodile attacks, with 4 of them being fatal. These were typically in the mangrove areas or inland swamps of the island, habitats which were typical for crocodiles. Just 2 days before the incident, Lauren had emailed one of her longtime childhood friends. It was clear from her message that she was having the time of her life. But, as was so typical of Lauren, she was also thinking about others and one of her best friends who was expecting her first baby. The message read, "Having an awesome and epic and hectic time in India. I miss you loads and wanted to wish you a happy, healthy anniversary. You rock my socks off." Tragically, by the time she had read Lauren's message, she had already met her horrifying final affliction.
It was September 4th, 2006, another day at work for 44-year-old Steve Irwin as he loaded his truck with supplies and equipment and set off for the Bat Reef near Port Douglas in northeastern Australia. He and his crew were preparing to shoot underwater footage for an upcoming documentary called Ocean's Deadliest for the Discovery Channel, directed by John Stanton. For several days prior to the scheduled shoot, John couldn't shake an eerie feeling that something bad was about to happen. He talked to his friends and producer requesting to call off the documentary, but the channel had already spent too much money on the project and could not afford further delays. But John Stanton still had an uneasy sensation that something would go wrong. He drafted a will and reluctantly set off for the reef, accompanied by Steve Irwin and his cameraman Justin Lyons. On the morning of September 4th, after arriving at the small town near Port Douglas, they boarded Steve Irwin's 75-foot research boat called the Croc 1 and sailed to the Bat Reef, near the Great Barrier Reef on the eastern Australian coast. The area hosted various species of marine life, including sea turtles, dolphins, and whales, but the crew wanted to encounter a shark to film for this episode, and so they donned their suits and put on their snorkels for a dive into the water. The sea was muddier than usual, and Steve and his cameraman Justin could not find a safe spot to look for a wandering shark. They decided it was best to call off the shoot for the day, as it was not the right time. But before they left, Steve Irwin spotted something that piqued his interest. It was not a shark, but a beautiful stingray. These marine animals could grow up to 5 meters or 16 feet in length, including a long, piercing tail of which they had great control and agility. It was their primary weapon in the underwater ecosystem. But Steve Irwin was not irked by the creature. He had been doing this his entire life and knew that stingrays were not known to attack humans unless provoked or accidentally stomped on. Steve swam closer to the animal until it was right beneath him. He thought this was the perfect angle to film some shots for his daughter Bindi's upcoming wildlife children's show called Bindi the Jungle Girl. He signaled his cameraman to swim down to him and start filming the animal. It was a serene sight. In the backdrop of the colorful ocean floor, stingrays had seldom been observed in such close proximity, as they would usually swim off or bury themselves in the sand upon encounters with humans. As Justin Lyons swam closer to Steve Irwin, they were blissfully ignorant of what was about to happen next. Steve Irwin was now only a few feet above the stingray, trying to work out the best angle to get a shot. But as he hovered closer, the stingray suddenly lunged its long, sharp tail upwards, slicing through Steve Irwin's chest. He didn't immediately realize the magnitude of the attack, and a numbing sensation engulfed his body for a few seconds. In the commotion of the water before they tried to swim back up, Steve Irwin instructed Justin to keep the camera rolling. Even in such dire circumstance, he wanted to get something out of the encounter. Justin Lyon, however, was painfully aware of what had just happened. There was a large 2-inch hole in Steve's chest, and he was now bleeding profusely, turning the surrounding water red. Fearing that the blood could attract a nearby shark, Justin grabbed Steve Irwin and urged him to swim up to safety. When they resurfaced, the gravity of his injuries became immediately clear. Steve Irwin was now in excruciating pain and losing blood fast. He screamed to Justin that his lungs had been punctured by the brutal attack, but the reality was far worse. The stingray's tail had cut into the side of Steve's heart, and the massive blood loss meant that he could lose his life in a few short minutes. Justin Lyons screamed to the crew on the boat that Steve Irwin was badly injured and needed help fast. The colleagues frantically threw him on an inflatable speedboat and quickly tried to get him to land. All the while they were with Steve, he displayed an indomitable spirit. He was losing consciousness, and as Justin and the crew forced weight on the wound to stop the bleeding, they called on him to stay alive for the sake of his family and his 2 children. Steve Irwin realized these were indeed his final moments, and calmly said he was going to die as they administered CPR. A few minutes later, he stopped moving. His eyes closed and his face turned blue. Steve Irwin, famed wildlife conservationist and beloved TV presenter, was dead.
Got a beautiful white blaze on his chest. Oh. He thinks I'm gonna take the banana off him. I gave him the banana.
And what do you want to be when you grow up?
Just like my daddy.
Just like your daddy.
Australian crocodile hunter Steve Irwin has died during a diving expedition near Port Douglas in Australia.
He was a charismatic crocodile hunter who cheated death again and again.
Terry Irwin has spoken of the loss of the man she called the love of her life. In a statement read by Steve's dad, she thanked the thousands who offered their condolences, and she's decided his public memorial will be held where Steve felt most comfortable, the crocodile pen at Australia Zoo.
Paramedics were called on the shore for a faint chance of resuscitating him, but it only took them a few seconds to declare that Steve Irwin had succumbed to his injuries and passed away. Even if he had been taken to a hospital, there was little chance that he could survive a strike straight into his heart. The stingray's razor-sharp tail had cut through Steve's chest, and he died among the animals and wildlife he had loved and cherished his entire life. The entire ordeal, from the stab of the stingray's tail to the final moments that the paramedics were trying to revive Steve Irwin, were captured on Justin Lyon's camera. But in respect for Steve's fighting spirit and to save his family the pain of witnessing the scene of his death, Justin deleted the final copy of the tape after a brief police investigation. The footage was never seen or released, but the sight of Steve's horrifying and painful final moments remained forever ingrained in the memory of the crew on board and the colleagues that loved and cherished him. His wife and children were on a trip in Tasmania when they heard the news of Steve Irwin's demise, and they were devastated and inconsolable at the tragic loss of their husband and father. His wife Terry and his children Bindi and Rob immediately traveled to the Australia Zoo, which Steve Irwin had run, and were met with love and consolation from thousands of adoring fans outside. Steve Irwin had earlier remarked that he would consider his final purpose in life fulfilled if he could pass on the torch of nature conservation to his children. In keeping with their father's wish, Bindi and Rob became dedicated zookeepers and conservationists and worked to carry on Steve Irwin's legacy in honor of his tragic and untimely final affliction. This Wednesday marked the 3rd day of their vacation in the Bahamas. Like many tourists, they had always dreamed of visiting the island country. Unlike most places in the world, the Bahamas wasn't falsely represented by the media and movies. It was, if not more, as stunning and exciting as they said. Jordan and her family woke up to the sunrise, eager to start the day. After all, this was only their 3rd day, and they had so many things to do. Jordan had breakfast with her family and shared stories with them as they sat together at the table. It was a fun time surrounded by the beautiful sandy beaches in the Bahamas and accompanied by her family and her girlfriend. What more could a 21-year-old girl from Torrance, California ask for? Back home, Jordan was studying communications at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. Her girlfriend Gianna was also studying communications. At around 12 p.m., the family had just finished their activities and were about to end the day relaxing and enjoying the scenery. However, that would soon change. Spotting the Sandy Toes Tour Company, the family decided to take a last-minute day trip to Rose Island. The 6-hour excursion involved a boat cruise, a snorkeling experience, and a private beach where you could pet swimming pigs. Jordan was ecstatic about the idea. She had always been an admirer of nature and deeply loved animals. Snorkeling and petting pigs in the Bahamas was music to her ears. Although the trip was already full for the day, Michael, Jordan's father, managed to convince the company to have them on board for the excursion. The company snuck them on. Excited at the deal, the family headed towards Paradise Island Ferry Terminal, ready to board the ferry that would take them to Rose Island. It was a tragic mistake. As the energetic family boarded the ferry, they beamed their smiles at each other, unaware of what was about to happen. Nobody could have predicted that this small day trip would change their lives forever. The small ferry was docked, floating atop the rich turquoise waters beneath it. Although it was in the middle of summer, the sun decided to hide effectively today behind the gray clouds looming over the ocean. Still, the waters were just as beautiful with the dimmer sunshine it was working with. Eventually, the family followed the guide to prepare for their snorkeling excursion. However, Michael, the two brothers, Jordan's sister, and Gianna did not want to go through with the snorkeling. They just wanted to spend the rest of the afternoon lightly swimming by the beachside, enjoying the scenic views of the ocean. Jordan and Cammie, on the other hand, wanted the full experience. It was the third day of their trip after all, and Jordan wanted to make the most of it. The family talked it over and decided they would just part for a while. Later, Jordan and Cammie would rendezvous with Michael and the rest by the beachside. Since the distance to the other side where the snorkeling spot was not so far, separating from one another seemed like a good idea at the time. However, it was a decision that everyone would later regret. As the two groups parted ways, Michael kissed Jordan on the forehead and told her, "I'll see you later, Jordan." Jordan waved her hand as she walked with Cammie towards the other part of the beach. The rest of the members left by the beachside waved her goodbye. Unbeknownst to them, this would be the last time they would see Jordan alive. Jordan and Cammie walked up to the guide and followed the trail. The snorkeling spot was not too far, but walking towards it was a great time for reflection. Along the way, there were green vegetation and exotic birds such as peacocks in the area. The trail was sparsely placed with benches, locker rooms, and bathrooms for the tourists. The narrow trail was surrounded by all kinds of trees growing through the sandy soil. Cammie and Jordan spoke about life, her school, and her family as they calmly walked alongside the other tourists. The bright 21-year-old had many aspirations and a great future ahead of her. Eventually, they reached the snorkeling spot. Donning their wetsuits, Jordan and Cammie prepared for the fun experience. Jordan was particularly excited to see the underwater critters meandering around in the area. It was time to go. Jordan headed towards the deeper parts of the water, admiring nature through her goggles. It was great timing as the sunlight began to show itself again, illuminating the beautiful structures of coral reefs under the water. Cammie had also gotten in the water and was thoroughly enjoying her underwater exploration. However, as the two enjoyed their experience, death reared its ugly head. As Jordan continued looking through the water, Cammie broke through the surface. Suddenly, she heard Jordan yell, "Mom!" She turned her head and saw something strange. At first, she thought it was a school of dolphins surrounding Jordan, and that Jordan wanted to show it to her. However, as she looked more intently, an ominous feeling enveloped her. It was a feeling no mother ever wanted to feel. A school of sharks had approached Jordan out of nowhere. Immediately, Cammie's motherly instincts kicked in. She shouted at Jordan from a distance, telling her to swim towards her. However, it was futile. Without warning, the school of sharks pounced on her, biting her everywhere. Jordan fought hard, but there was already blood in the water, and the sharks had become frenzied. Jordan let loose blood-curdling screams, prompting Cammie to approach her. She screamed at Jordan once more, asking her to swim towards her. However, Jordan could not swim anymore. Cammie noticed her right arm had been bitten off by the shark. Horrified at the sight, Cammie immediately sprang into action, swimming towards Jordan despite the risk of getting attacked herself. Naturally, she was fearful of swimming into the chaos, but she didn't care. The fear of losing her child overtook any instinct to run and call for help. It was simply something any loving mother would have done. Cammie reached Jordan and fought off the sharks, punching the beasts in the nose and hitting them with everything she had. As she pulled on Jordan, the young girl told Cammie, "Mom, there's another shark coming." The shark sped towards them like a freight train. It bit off another chunk of her lower leg. Jordan was bleeding profusely. Cammie never gave up. She hauled Jordan toward a nearby rock and called for help. Eventually, a boat from the Sandy Toes snorkeling tour rushed to her aid. Michael and the other family members were petting pigs by the beachside when they heard of a teenager attacked by sharks in the snorkeling area. After waiting a few minutes, Jordan was taken by an ambulance to a hospital in Nassau. However, upon arrival, she was pronounced dead. When Michael and the rest arrived at the hospital, they were too late. Jordan had succumbed to her injuries. In the subsequent months following her death, the family criticized the company for not having any protocols when it came to shark attacks. When the incident happened, not one staff or a boat was present to whisk away the sharks. Additionally, when Jordan was bleeding on a nearby island, barely clinging to life, the boat that would take her to the hospital arrived with no medical supplies. According to Michael, they did not even have first aid. The Lindsays called for better responses in the future to avoid the terrible fate their daughter experienced. Sadly, according to Michael, in his most recent interviews, Cammie is still too traumatized from the incident, especially because she was present and she witnessed firsthand her daughter resting in her arms while slowly succumbing to her final affliction.